Thanks, Ceann Comhairle. Taoiseach, of all the promised legislation before this House, the abortion legislation is the legislation that has the most unequivocal democratic mandate from the people of this country. It is also legislation that has a very definite timeline to make the facilities available, to make abortion facilities available to women in this country. But because a minority of people in this country seem to wish to frustrate the democratic wishes of the people in this country, regardless of the consequences for Irish women, there is now a real danger that legislation will not pass in time. So there's a couple of things I want to know. First of all, I want to know on the whether or not amendments that normally are given a very strict deadline but have now been accepted from this minority for the order paper today, even though they were debated yesterday but are being brought in again today, how they are in order. We're never allowed to do that. And they've already been debated. Are they in order? I want to know that. But regardless of that question, given the obvious attempts by some to frustrate the democratic wishes of the people of this country, at this stage we need to send a clear signal that we will sit on Friday if necessary, that we will sit until this legislation finishes this week, and that if necessary, because this legislation could be amended in the Seanad, that the Dáil will sit extra days before Christmas to deal with any amendments that might come from the Seanad. We need an absolute clear signal this attempt to frustrate the abortion legislation will not succeed and that the legislation will pass into law before Christmas.
Taoiseach.
I understand that 7.5 hours have been set aside tonight, which is a large block of time, and I really hope that that will be sufficient for us to pass the legislation through the Dáil today. And I'd encourage any deputies making contributions on this legislation to be pithy and not to repeat arguments they've already made, because that is unnecessary and only causes us to take time, longer time than is needed. I think it's fair to say that there was a time when things were different, when we had majority governments, when the government controlled the House, and perhaps when that was the case, we stifled debate too quickly and we used the guillotine too frequently, and that led to bad legislation being done. But we do now have the other extreme, which is legislation being held up in this House, legislation being held up in the other House, and as a consequence of that, all sorts of other legislation backing up behind it, and that is very frustrating, I think.